Hi, my name is Sarah Reeves, and my presentation is on Is Abstinence-Only Sex Education Ethical? So what is abstinence-only sex education? As defined by the Social Security Act, abstinence education must have the purpose of teaching the gains of abstaining from sexual activity. It must teach abstinence from outside of marriage as the expected standard. It should teach that abstinence from sexual activity is the only certain way to avoid out-of-wedlock pregnancy, STDs, and other health problems. It should teach that a mutually faithful, monogamous relationship within the context of marriage is the standard of human sexual activity. As well as it should teach that sexual activity outside of marriage is likely to have harmful effects. It should teach that bearing children out of wedlock will have harmful consequences for the child, the parent, and for society. It should teach young people how to reject sexual advances and how alcohol and drug use increases vulnerability to sexual advances. And finally, teach the importance of attaining self-sufficiency before engaging in sexual activity. So how prevalent is abstinence education? There are two federal funded projects, Title X State Abstinence Education Grant Program and the Competitive Abstinence Education Program. Both of these projects fund abstinence-only education, and they focus mainly on groups that are likely to bear children out of wedlock. In fiscal year 2014, the Title X program provided $35.8 million to 39 states and territories. And in the same year, the Competitive Abstinence Education Program provided $4.5 million to 11 projects across the country. So a little bit of background on sexuality education. Currently, 24 states plus the District of Columbia require some form of sex ed in the public school. Over the last 25 years, Congress have spent almost $2 billion on abstinence-only programs. Currently, there is no scientific evidence that abstinence programs are effective. So within the last year, you can see here some legislative highlights that regard sex ed. 61 bills sought to advance the quality of sex ed, 23 bills sought to restrict sex ed, and 8 laws were enacted across 6 different states. 5 of these laws advance the quality of education and 3 impose new restrictions. So although there's been steady progress towards evidence-based sexuality education, there are still efforts to minimize and restrict sexuality education. Passage of these bills, as well as federal budget approvals, are mainly guided by the actions of the Senate. So what are the moral principles involved in this topic? The main moral principles revolve around autonomy, self-determination, non-maleficence, and beneficence. So in determining this ethical issue, the questions to consider are, does abstinence-only sex ed allow for personal autonomy, and does it allow for self-determination? Does it avoid causing harm, and does it cause good? Nash defines an ethical dilemma as a situation in which 2 or more courses of action are in conflict with each other, and each can be defended as the good course to take. In this case, the ethical tension is between abstinence-only sexuality education and comprehensive sexuality education. You can see here a few of the main differences between these two different approaches. So abstinence education, as I said, lacks evidence of effectiveness, whereas comprehensive education is evidence-based. Abstinence education teaches that sex outside of marriage will have harmful consequences, whereas comprehensive teaches that sexuality is a normal, healthy part of life. Abstinence education focuses on one set of values, whereas comprehensive promotes students to explore their own values and to speak with their families and communities to figure out what those values are for themselves. And you'll see a few more examples here, but really the main differences are abstinence education focuses on one set of values, is not necessarily medically accurate, whereas comprehensive education provides overall positive messages around sexuality and is medically accurate So now let's take a look at the 3 moral languages and how they can help us further explore this topic. The first language is the language of background beliefs. So the language of background beliefs considers the question, what underlying beliefs help you make sense of the world? So in this first step, we're not trying to solve the problem or the dilemma, but we're simply trying to understand it. So we're looking at our moral authority and our moral convictions. Moral authority are the most fundamental assumptions that guide our perceptions about the nature of reality and what we experience as good or bad, right or wrong, important or unimportant. These assumptions are the ultimate bases by which we make our ethical decisions. So this moral authority can be guided by religion, spirituality, science, observation, logic, or emotion. And our moral convictions can also be based on rights, ideals, conscience, law, and religion. So now that we have a little bit of the background, we move to the second language of moral character. So the purpose of the second language is to give some contextual information for the decision maker. So moral character, we're looking at, is composed of overall moral characteristics. This includes feelings and intuitions, virtues, and character. And all of these things can be shaped by our community. When we look at the second moral language, it's important to consider our immediate feelings and intuitions. What are our first thoughts regarding the case? We should also identify any conflicting moral feelings. These moral feelings can motivate us and provide insight. Virtuous persons strive to achieve a balance between noble intention and just action. Identifying personal virtues can guide your decision-making on an ethical issue. Once we identify our feelings and virtues and how these may be shaped by our community, we can begin to consider what actions would be in character and what actions would be out of character. So the third language is the language of moral principle. The purpose of this language is to justify or defend an ethical decision based on logical appeal to rules, principles, and theories. So this is the language where we will finally start to figure out what our decision is. So when we're analyzing the third language, these are some questions to consider. Why is this a moral dilemma? Nash defines a moral dilemma as when there are 2 or more courses of actions or moral choices that are in conflict with each other, and each one can be defended as the right choice. So what are the choices involved? Should sexuality education be abstinence only, or should it be comprehensive? Who are the morally relevant actors? In this case, that could include government leaders, health educators, nonprofits, youth. What are some consequences of each of the decisions? With abstinence-only education, youth are getting sexual health information, but they're getting it in a way that may cause shame if their behavior does not fall within the guidelines of this approach. LGBTQ youth might not be addressed. Youth may not get all of the information that they need to make the best sexual health decision. With comprehensive sex ed, youth are getting the information. They are encouraged to explore their own personal values and those of their family and community to decide what is best for them. It is inclusive of LGBTQ youth, and youth are provided the information and the skills that they need to make sexual health decisions. And finally, looking at what are some of the principles involved in this decision. So as we previously discussed, the main principles involved in this decision are autonomy, self-determination, beneficence, and non-maleficence. So does abstinence-only education allow for people to make their own decisions free of coercion? And does it give them all the information that they need to make the choice that matches along with their values? So how should this issue be resolved? When we look at the Health Educator Code of Ethics, we see that we have a responsibility to the public. So we must consider the wellness and quality of living through principles of self-determination and freedom of choice for the individual. Along this article, we should support the right of individuals to make informed choices and encourage actions and policies that support and facilitate the best balance of benefits over harm. Article 4 states that we have a responsibility to the delivery of health education. So we need to respect the rights, dignity, confidentiality, and worth of all people by adapting our methods to meet the needs of diverse populations and communities. So under this article, we should be informed of the latest advances in theory, research, and practice, and use strategies and methods that are grounded in and contribute to the development of professional standards. So to me, this means that the sexuality education should allow for people to make their own choices for themselves, as well as we should make sure that the information and approach that we are taking is inclusive of all people and does not cause shame or leave anyone out. So the professional community beliefs. In my professional community, the beliefs are that sexuality education should be evidence-based. It should be inclusive of different sexual orientations and gender identities, should be medically accurate, trauma-informed, culturally informed, based on theories of behavior change, and it should provide both information and skills needed. My personal beliefs regarding this topic is that sexual health information is a basic human right. People should not be provided health information based on contentious values. Sexual health education should provide facts and allow learners to decide what behaviors fall under their own personal values. I also believe that young people have a right to non-biased sexual health information. So my resolution is that sexuality education should be based on universal values. These are values that are shared by a majority of Americans. That includes things like forcing someone to have sex is wrong, taking care of reproductive health is important. It should not be based on non-universal values. Topics that people have a range of beliefs should not shape the information provided. This would mean things like the message that sex outside of marriage is wrong. So my resolution is that federal funding should not be used to support abstinence-only education programs. Here are my references. Thank you.